It started so subtly I almost missed it. You know how they say you don't notice the first raindrop in a storm? That was us. Emily and I had been together for 7 years, married for 4. We had our rhythms, weeknight dinners, Saturday morning coffee runs, inside jokes only the two of us could understand. Life wasn't perfect, but it was ours, and I thought it was enough. Looking back now, the signs were there. She started coming home later than usual from work with vague excuses about last-minute projects or catching up with coworkers. At first, I didn't think much of it. She worked in marketing, and long hours weren't uncommon. But then there were the other things, little things that I wouldn't have noticed if I hadn't started paying closer attention. Her phone was always glued to her hand, and she'd angled the screen away when I walked by. She used to share memes or funny texts with me, but that stopped. I brushed it off, thinking maybe she was just scrolling mindlessly like we all do. But then I caught her smiling at her screen one night, her face lighting up in a way I hadn't seen in a while. I asked her what was so funny, and she immediately clicked her phone off, saying, "Oh, just something stupid from work." Her tone was off, too casual, too rehearsed. My gut tightened, but I told myself I was imagining things. The distance grew in other ways. She stopped asking about my day, stopped laughing at my dumb jokes. Our conversations became shorter, like she couldn't be bothered. Intimacy? That became rare too. I can count on one hand the number of times we slept together in those last few months. She'd always have some excuse, too tired, a headache, deadlines. At first, I gave her the benefit of the doubt. Everyone goes through phases, right? But eventually, I started wondering if I was the problem. Did I do something wrong? Had I let myself go? One night, about 2 months before everything came crashing down, we were at dinner with some friends, and I caught her looking at her phone under the table. Her face had that same glow, that little half smile I hadn't seen in ages. My stomach dropped. I don't know what possessed me, but I leaned over and whispered, "Everything okay?" She actually flinched, and quickly set her phone down, face down on the table. "Yeah, of course," she said a little too brightly. The others at the table didn't seem to notice, but I felt it. Something was off. I didn't confront her right away. I wasn't ready for what I might find. Instead, I did what any paranoid husband might do. I started watching more closely. I paid attention to her schedule, her moods, her phone habits. She'd started working out more often, wearing perfume to girls' nights when she hadn't before. Little things that might not mean anything on their own, but together, they painted a picture I didn't want to see. I even checked her phone once when she was in the shower, but she had a passcode on it, a new one. We'd always shared everything, and now she was locking me out. The breaking point came one Friday night. She was supposed to be out with her friends, but I got a text from one of them, Jessica, asking if Emily was okay. Confused, I replied, "Why wouldn't she be? Isn't she with you?" There was a pause, and then Jessica sent back, "No, we haven't seen her all week." I stared at my phone, my heart pounding. She had lied to my face. That night, I waited for her to come home. My mind raced with possibilities, excuses, explanations that might make this all less horrifying. She walked through the door around midnight, her cheeks flushed, her hair slightly disheveled. When I asked her how her night was, she smiled and said, "Good. Just the usual." I wanted to scream, to demand answers, but I stayed quiet. I just watched her as she slipped out of her shoes, kissed my cheek absent-mindedly, and went upstairs. In that moment, I knew. I didn't have proof yet, but I knew. And the knowing was worse than anything I'd ever felt. After that Friday night, I couldn't shake the feeling that my world was starting to fall apart, piece by piece. I tried to tell myself I was imagining things, that maybe Emily really had been out with her friends and Jessica had just gotten confused. But deep down I knew. I could feel the distance growing between us, and it wasn't just in my head. The warmth that used to be there, the easy way we talk and laugh was gone, replaced by something colder, more calculated. It felt like living with a stranger. The worst part was pretending everything was normal. I kept telling myself I wasn't ready to confront her, that I needed to be sure before I did anything. But honestly, I think I was afraid. Afraid of what I'd find. Afraid of what it would mean for us if I was right. So instead of confronting her, I started digging. If there was a secret, I was going to find it. It began with her phone. She'd gotten lax about leaving it lying around, probably because I'd never been the kind of guy to snoop. But now I was desperate. One afternoon, while she was in the shower, I grabbed it off the nightstand and tried the passcode. Nothing. I tried again. Still nothing. My chest felt tight as I realized she had changed it, and not once had she mentioned it to me. She used to tell me her passcode was just in case something ever happened. Now, it was another locked door between us. Frustrated, I put the phone back before she could notice, but I didn't stop there. I started paying attention to the small things, the cracks in her stories. Her girls' nights didn't line up when I'd casually mention them to Jessica or another one of her friends. There were gaps in her explanations, weird details that didn't quite add up. Like the time she claimed she had a work dinner, and I found a receipt from a wine bar tucked into her purse the next morning. She said it was for a team outing, but when I asked her how it went, she got flustered, stumbling over her words like she was making it up on the spot. Then there was her gym bag. She'd been working out more, and while I told myself it was a good thing, she seemed happier, more energized. There was one night where I caught the faint scent of cologne on the strap. Not my cologne, someone else's. I tried to convince myself it was nothing, that maybe she brushed past someone at the gym, but it stayed with me, nagging at the back of my mind. The final straw, the moment I knew I couldn't keep pretending, came when I checked our shared credit card statement. I wasn't proud of it, but I had to know. As I scrolled through the transactions, my stomach twisted into knots. There were charges for dinners at restaurants we'd never been to, hotel stays in the middle of the day, and even a flower shop. My first thought was that maybe she'd been planning a surprise for me, but I quickly realized how stupid that sounded. She wasn't planning anything for me. She hadn't even looked at me the same way in months. It wasn't just the spending that hurt. It was the realization that she had been living this secret life, making plans and memories with someone else while I was at home, clueless. I started to feel like I was going crazy. Was this really happening? Was the woman I'd built my life with capable of something like this? I'd always thought Emily was the honest one, the kind of person who couldn't lie if her life depended on it. But now I realized that I didn't know her at all. I couldn't keep it inside anymore. I needed answers, but I also didn't want to go into a confrontation blind. I needed proof, not just for myself, but because part of me wanted to confront her in a way she couldn't deny. I wanted to see her face when I laid it all out, when there was no room left for her excuses or gaslighting. So I did something I never thought I'd do. I followed her. The next time she said she was going to meet the girls, I told her I had plans of my own. I kissed her goodbye, acting as normal as I could, and then I waited. I gave her a 10-minute head start before getting into my car and heading toward the gym where she said they were meeting for yoga. She never went to the gym. Instead, I watched as she drove across town to a quiet little cafe, the kind of place you'd go to avoid being noticed. My heart was pounding as I parked across the street, my palms sweating as I waited, watching. And then he showed up, tall, confident, wearing a crisp button-down shirt that screamed effort. I recognized him immediately, Ethan, one of her coworkers. I'd met him once at a company party, and at the time, he'd seemed friendly enough. But now I couldn't stop staring as he leaned in to kiss my wife. It wasn't a friendly kiss. It wasn't even a kiss you'd give someone you just started seeing. It was the kind of kiss you give someone you've been with, someone who's yours. The air seemed to leave my lungs all at once. I couldn't move, couldn't think. All I could do was sit there, frozen, as the truth finally hit me. She was having an affair. My wife was cheating on me. I stayed in the car for what felt like hours, my mind racing with every emotion imaginable. Anger, betrayal, sadness, even humiliation. How long had this been going on? How many people knew? Was I the last to figure it out? My hands shook as I tried to decide what to do next. Should I go in there and confront them right now? Should I call her? Should I drive home and pretend I hadn't seen anything? In the end, I did nothing. I just sat there, watching them laugh and hold hands like they didn't have a care in the world. And when they finally left, walking arm in arm to his car, I followed them. I wasn't proud of it, but I needed to know where this was going. Well, they were going. They ended up at a hotel. I sat in the parking lot for nearly an hour, staring at the entrance where they'd disappeared, feeling like my entire life had just been ripped away from me. The anger started to bubble up, hot and uncontrollable, and I gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. I wasn't ready to confront her yet, but I knew I couldn't keep this inside any longer. I had to make a decision and fast because the cracks in our foundation weren't just cracks anymore. They were full-on fractures, and I didn't know if there was anything left to save. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her smile, his hand on her waist, the way they kissed like no one else existed. It played on a loop in my head, torturing me. By the time the sun rose, I felt hollow. I hadn't even had the energy to cry. I was just numb. But underneath it all, there was this simmering anger, this need to finally say something, to stop pretending that everything was fine. Emily came downstairs around 8 a.m., her hair still messy from sleep, wearing one of my old t-shirts like nothing had changed. Like she hadn't spent the night betraying me while I sat in a parking lot, watching my marriage crumble. She smiled faintly and said, "Morning," as she grabbed a mug to pour herself some coffee. It took everything in me not to explode right then and there. Instead, I just watched her, studying every detail of her face, trying to figure out if she felt even a shred of guilt. "Morning," I said, my voice tighter than I wanted it to be. She turned to look at me, her brow furrowing slightly. "You okay? You look tired." "Yeah," I said. "Didn't sleep much." She gave a little nod, like it didn't mean anything, and turned back to her coffee. I wanted to scream at her. How could she act so normal? How could she stand there, drinking coffee in our kitchen, like she hadn't spent the night in another man's arms? "Emily," I said, my voice cutting through the quiet like a knife. She froze for a second, then turned back to me. "We need to talk." There it was, that flicker of panic in her eyes. She tried to hide it, forcing a smile. "What's wrong?" she asked, her tone overly casual. But I saw through it. I saw her hands tighten around the mug, her shoulders stiffen. She knew. "Were you last night?" I asked, my voice calm but firm. Her smile faltered. "I told you," she said quickly. "I was out with the girls." "No, you weren't," I said, cutting her off. Her eyes widened slightly, and I felt my stomach twist. "I talked to Jessica. She said she hasn't seen you in weeks." Emily's mouth opened, then closed, like she was trying to think of an excuse. But I didn't give her the chance. "I know. Emily," I said, my voice breaking. "I know about Ethan. I know about the hotel. I know about all of it." Her face went pale. For a moment, she just stood there, staring at me like a deer caught in headlights. And then, finally, she set the mug down on the counter and let out a shaky breath. "It's not what you think," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I laughed bitterly, the sound surprising even me. "It's not what I think." I repeated. "I sat in a parking lot for an hour last night while you were with him. I watched you walk into that hotel together. So please, Emily, tell me what it actually is, because I'd love to hear it." Her hands were trembling now. She looked away, biting her lip like she was trying to hold back tears. "I didn't mean for this to happen," she said finally. It just happened. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. It just happened," I said, my voice rising. "You don't just accidentally have an affair, Emily. You made a choice. Multiple choices. So don't stand there and tell me it just happened." She flinched, and for a moment, I thought she was going to deny it again. But then the tears started. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry." "Sorry?" I said, my voice breaking. "You're sorry? Do you have any idea what you've done to me? To us? How long has this been going on, Emily? How long have you been lying to me?" She wiped at her tears, her hands shaking. "A few months," she admitted. It started after that fight we had about the move. I don't know, I felt so disconnected. And, "Ethan, don't you dare blame this on me," I snapped, cutting her off. "Don't you dare stand there and act like this is my fault. I've been here, Emily. I've been trying. I've been working my ass off to make sure we have a life together. And you just threw it all away." Her tears were falling harder now, but I didn't feel sorry for her. Not in that moment. All I felt was anger, hot, raw, all-consuming anger. "Do you love him?" I asked the question, spilling out before I could stop it. She looked at me, her eyes wide and full of guilt. "I don't know," she said softly. That was the final blow. Not no, not even yes. Just I don't know. Like, she couldn't even decide if what we had was worth saving. I felt something inside me break, a part of me that I wasn't sure I'd ever get back. "I can't do this," I said, my voice hollow. "I need some time to think, to figure out what the hell I'm supposed to do now." "Wait," she said, reaching for me, but I stepped back. Please, just let's talk about this. We can fix it. I'll do whatever it takes, I swear. But I couldn't even look at her. You should have thought about that before you started sleeping with him, I said, my voice cold. I don't even know who you are anymore. I grabbed my keys and walked out the door, leaving her standing there crying. As I got into my car and drove away, the weight of everything hit me all at once. My wife had cheated on me. The person I'd trusted most in the world had betrayed me in the worst way possible. And the worst part? I didn't know if I'd ever be able to forgive her or if I even wanted to. I drove aimlessly for hours, my mind an absolute war zone. Every emotion I'd been trying to suppress came flooding in: rage, heartbreak, confusion, humiliation. I screamed once, just this guttural, raw sound that I didn't even recognize as my own. It didn't help. Nothing helped. I couldn't think straight, couldn't process how the life I built with Emily had disintegrated overnight. Eventually, I found myself parked outside my best friend Kyle's house. He'd been my best man at the wedding, the guy I'd known since college, the one person I trusted with my messiest emotions. I hadn't planned to come here, but my hands had steered the wheel before my brain could intervene. Part of me didn't even want to say anything. Once you speak it out loud, it becomes real, but I couldn't keep this inside anymore. I felt like I was going to burst. Kyle answered the door in sweatpants, a beer in hand, his face lighting up when he saw me. Hey, Mun, where are you? His smile dropped the second he saw my expression. Jesus, what's wrong? I walked in without a word and collapsed onto his couch, my head in my hands. It took me a few minutes to even start talking, and when I did, the words came out in a rush. Emily's cheating on me, I blurted out, my voice shaking. She's been seeing someone else for months. Kyle froze, his beer halfway to his mouth. What? He said, his voice sharp. Are you serious? I nodded, my throat tightening. I followed her last night. Saw her with him. Watched them go into a hotel together. It's Ethan, that guy from her work. Holy shit, Kyle muttered, setting his beer down. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. Man, I'm so sorry. I don't even know what to say. Are you okay? Do I look okay? I snapped, and then immediately regretted it. Sorry. I don't know what the hell I'm supposed to do. She says she's sorry, says she wants to fix things. But how do you come back from something like this? How do you rebuild when everything feels like a lie? Kyle didn't say anything for a moment. He just sat there, letting me spill my guts. And for some reason, that made it easier to keep talking. I told him everything. How the signs had been there for months, how I'd ignored my gut, how I'd watched them kiss like I didn't even exist. She told me she doesn't know if she loves him. I said finally, my voice cracking. What the hell am I supposed to do with that? She's not even sure if what we had is worth fighting for. Kyle exhaled sharply, shaking his head. Man, that's brutal. I wish I had some magic answer for you, but I don't. You got to figure out what you want. Do you want to try to fix this? Or is it just over? I don't know, I admitted. I loved her, Kyle. I still love her. But how do I trust her again? How do I ever look at her and not think about him? That's the question, isn't it? Kyle said softly. Look, no one would blame you if you walked away. Hell, I'd probably tell you too. But if you think there's even a chance you can forgive her, you've got to take your time figuring it out. Don't let her rush you into anything. We sat there for hours, talking it through. Kyle didn't give me advice so much as listen, which I appreciated more than I could say. By the time I left, I felt a little more grounded, like I could breathe again. But the weight of the decision still hung over me. Do I try to save this marriage? Or do I walk away from the life we'd built together? When I got home, the house was dark except for a single light in the living room. Emily was sitting on the couch, her knees pulled to her chest, her face streaked with tears. She looked up when I walked in, and for a second, neither of us said anything. The silence was deafening. I didn't think you were coming back, she said finally, her voice trembling. I set my keys on the table and stood there, staring at her. I didn't know what to say, didn't even know how to begin. But then the anger bubbled up again, and I couldn't stop myself. Why, Emily? I asked, my voice breaking. Why him? Why any of this? I gave you everything. I trusted you. I don't know, she whispered, her face crumpling. I don't have a good answer, okay? I wasn't thinking. I was stupid and selfish and God. I hate myself for what I've done to you. You don't just trip and fall into an affair, I snapped. You made a choice over and over again. You chose him. So why? Was I not enough for you? Did you stop loving me? No, she said quickly, shaking her head. I never stopped loving you. I swear. But we've been so distant, and I felt like I couldn't reach you anymore. Ethan was just there. He listened. He made me feel wanted. Her words hit me like a slap to the face. So this is my fault? I asked bitterly. Because I didn't pay enough attention to you? No, that's not what I'm saying, she said, her voice cracking. I messed up. I betrayed you, and I'll regret it for the rest of my life. But I want to fix this. Please, let me fix this. I stared at her, searching her face for any sign of the woman I used to know. She looked so broken, so desperate, and for a moment, I felt a pang of pity. But then I thought about Ethan, about the lies, about the hotel. My stomach turned. I don't know if I can do this, I said finally. I don't know if I can ever trust you again. Her sobs filled the room, and I turned away, heading upstairs without another word. I couldn't stay down there with her, couldn't listen to her cry, while my heart was still in pieces. As I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, one thought kept running through my mind. How do you fix something when it's been shattered beyond recognition? Could it even be fixed at all? I didn't have the answers. All I knew was that the Emily I thought I knew, the life I thought we had, it was gone. And I wasn't sure if there was anything left worth salvaging. The days after the confrontation were some of the darkest of my life. Emily and I barely spoke, existing like strangers under the same roof. She tried, in her own way, making my coffee in the mornings, leaving notes on the kitchen counter apologizing, telling me she loved me. But every time I looked at her, I saw Ethan. I saw her laugh at his jokes, hold his hand, kiss him. The betrayal was like an open wound that refused to scab over. I wasn't sure if it ever would. I spent most nights on the couch, staring blankly at the TV while my mind replayed every moment of our relationship, every anniversary, every fight, every time she'd said I love you. Was it all a lie? Had she been pretending even back then? I started questioning everything, not just about her, but about myself. What kind of man had I been that my wife had to go find comfort in the arms of someone else? Had I failed her? Had I failed us? But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that those questions didn't matter. Because no matter how distant we've been, no matter how flawed our marriage might have been, there was one thing I'd never done. I'd never walked away from her. I'd never betrayed her. I'd stayed and I'd fought, and she hadn't. She'd made a choice, and that choice had shattered everything we'd built together. That wasn't on me. That was on her. A week after the confrontation, I finally told her I needed space. Real space. I think I should leave for a while, I said, standing in the kitchen while she hovered near the sink. Her eyes widened, already filling with tears. She opened her mouth to argue, but I held up a hand. I'm not saying it's over. I'm saying I need time. I can't think clearly with you here. Where will you go? She whispered, her voice trembling. Kyle's, I said, just for a while. I don't know how long. She nodded, her lip quivering as she tried to hold it together. I understand, she said softly. But please don't give up on us, okay? I'll do anything to make this right. Therapy, counseling, whatever it takes. Just please don't give up. I didn't respond. I couldn't because the truth was I didn't know if I had anything left to give. I packed a bag that night and left her standing in the doorway, her arms wrapped around herself like she was trying to hold herself together. And maybe she was. But I didn't look back. At Kyle's, I started trying to piece myself back together. The first few nights, I mostly drank too much and talked in circles, replaying the same questions over and over again. How could she do this to me? Why him? Was I blind? Or did I just not want to see it? Kyle listened patiently, never interrupting, but after a while, even he started to run out of words. Listen, man, he said one night, handing me another beer. You're not going to find the answers by sitting here and driving yourself crazy. You got to start focusing on you. Figure out what you want, what you need. Screw her for a second. What do you want your life to look like? That question stayed with me. What did I want? For so long, my life had revolved around Emily, her happiness, her career, her needs. But now that the future we planned together was in ruins, I realized I didn't even know who I was without her. I didn't know what I wanted, what made me happy. And maybe that was part of the problem. Maybe I'd lost myself along the way. So I started trying to find myself again. I went to the gym, not to punish myself, but because it felt good to move, to sweat, to do something tangible. I reconnected with old friends I hadn't seen in years, people I'd pushed to the sidelines because I was so wrapped up in my marriage. I even went hiking one weekend with Kyle, something I hadn't done since college. For the first time in years, I started doing things just for me. But it wasn't all forward progress. There were nights when I'd lie awake, my chest aching with the weight of everything I'd lost. There were mornings when I'd see a couple holding hands and feel a wave of anger so strong it made me sick. Healing wasn't a straight line. It was messy and painful and full of setbacks. But slowly, very slowly, I started to feel like I could breathe again. Emily and I kept in touch during my time away, mostly through texts. She apologized constantly, begged me to come home, said she was going to therapy on her own to fix what's broken inside me. I believed she was sorry. I really did. But her remorse didn't erase what she'd done. It didn't undo the nights she'd spent with him, the lies she'd told, the choices she'd made. Forgiveness wasn't just something I could hand out like a Hallmark card. It had to be earned, and even then, I wasn't sure if it would be enough. A month after I left, we finally sat down to talk, face to face. She looked thinner, her eyes red from crying, and I felt a pang of guilt at how broken she looked. But I reminded myself that this wasn't my fault. I hadn't done this to her. She'd done it to us. I want to try, she said, her voice trembling. I want to fix this, no matter how long it takes. But if you can't forgive me, I'll understand. Just tell me the truth. I stared at her, my chest tight with conflicting emotions. Part of me still loved her. Part of me always would. But there was another part of me, a growing part, that couldn't see a future with her anymore. I'd lost too much. We lost too much. I don't know, I said finally, my voice breaking. I don't know if I can ever forgive you, Emily. I don't know if I even want her face crumpled, and I felt my own tears start to fall. We sat there for what felt like hours, crying for everything we'd lost, for the future we'd never have. And in that moment, I realized something. No matter how much I wanted to go back to the way things were, I couldn't. Some things can't be undone. Some wounds don't heal. In the end, I decided to file for divorce. It wasn't an easy decision, but it was the right one. I couldn't spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder, wondering if she'd betray me again. I couldn't live with the ghosts of her affair haunting every moment of our marriage. Letting go was the hardest thing I've ever done, but it was also the most necessary. The months that followed were brutal, splitting assets, telling our families, signing the papers. But as painful as it was, there was also relief. Relief in knowing I was free to start over, to rebuild my life on my own terms. It's been a year now since everything fell apart. I won't lie and say I'm fully healed. There are still days when it hurts, when the memories creep in and knock the wind out of me. But there are also days when I feel hopeful, when I can see a future that's mine and mine alone. I've started dating again, cautiously, and while it's terrifying, it's also exciting. For the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm moving forward. Emily and I don't talk much anymore. I hear through mutual friends that she's still in therapy, still trying to figure out who she is. I wish her the best. I really do. But I've realized that forgiveness doesn't always mean reconciliation. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for yourself is let go. And that's what I'm trying to do one day at a time.